Welcome back, Honors. All right, welcome to a new week. Welcome to us getting after it, all right? So we spent today in class doing something again, very honors-like, having limited words on the screen, but y'all being responsible for the information, like knowing who Hernan Cortez is, knowing what his motivations were behind conquesting the Aztec, like knowing some parts of the story to make it make a lot more sense when it comes to, how he didn't actually get the job at first, and how the guy that did get the job mysteriously showed up murdered, and how there were actually two interpreters, not one interpreter, etc., 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 right? So the biggest thing going into this one is now we're talking about Pizarro, which is another conquistador who looks like this, who is actually a second, possibly third cousin of Cortez, but they are related, and his conquest of the Inca, right? So now, speaking of, we talked about a lot of different stuff with some of these native peoples in class, right? We talked about why they weren't quite on the advancement level of the conquistadors. We talked about why they were never going to be able to be on the advancement level of conquistadors, due to the fact that they don't have forged metals or certain farming techniques. Sorry, it's 7:20 right now, so still kind of kicking it up a little bit. But we do know that the Inca are also, much like the Aztec, phenomenally advanced, right? So go ahead and jot this down. The Inca are from Peru, right? So Peru being on the west coast of South America next to Brazil, and also south of, it's north of Bolivia, and it's south, I think, of Ecuador. All right, so let's double check that real quick. Oh, nope. I need a new tab. New tab. There we go. Peru. I think it's Ecuador. Come on, Ecuador. Yeah! I was right. All right, so anyway, south of Ecuador, right here, north of Bolivia, west of Brazil, okay? So home to the famous Inca Empire, right? Now, looking immediately at this picture of Machu Picchu, which apparently a lot of y'all have taken a VR trip with Miss Reams before, because Miss Reams is the best. Machu Picchu was their religious city, right? Set atop of the Andes Mountains. So some of y'all immediately are already realizing, you're like, wow, why out of all the places would the Inca choose to settle the Andes Mountains? Well, we don't really know specifically why the Inca ended up in the Andes Mountains. We do know that they became a phenomenally developed and very intense society that was built completely atop ridges of mountains, right? So the craziest thing about it is they had a massive empire spanning over 10,000 miles, including trade routes, established infrastructure, and they did all this without ever learning how to write a language, right? They didn't have a single written language. So their two biggest sites are Machu Picchu, which is right here, and then they also have a capital city known as Cusco, right? So C-U-Z-C-O, I think it's Cusco, yeah. So now the biggest thing about it is, like I said, they had 10,000 miles worth of trade routes, bridges that expanded valleys like this one, a very intense infrastructure, all without ever actually having a written language. This is the only type of written language the Incans ever had. They're things called quipus, right? Quipus, Q-U-I-P-O. And what it is it's actually not a writing system, it's a number system, right? It's a way of keeping track of certain items, given the knots on the ropes. And we still don't understand exactly how it works, but it's the closest thing they have to a writing system, yet they were still able to have crazy architecture like this, and then also an extremely established farming system. And you have them to thank for a lot of different things, farming-wise anyway. So, for example, this is a big thing you have to thank them for, all right? This is one of the only two domesticated animals in all of North and South America, right? You have the dog, which has been domesticated for 10,000 years, right? The oldest domesticated animal in the world. And then you have this guy, the llama, right? So the llama is the only domesticated animal that existed in the Incan Empire, right? Now, the crazy thing about it is, like we talked about this earlier, the Europeans had access to all types of domesticated animals, right? Well, even though there's only 9, species of domesticated animal, large base mammal in the world, including, 2 types of camel, 2 types of cow, dog, etc. Well, this guy right here, the llamas, they're actually cousins of camels, right? They're actually related to camels, but they can only carry about 60 pounds. So they're good for moving things pack-wise, but you can't ride one, which is another big reason why horses were such a terrifying thing when the natives first saw them. And also, it's yet another disadvantage for the natives, right? They didn't have those beasts of burden to try and help them build up immunity to certain diseases, right? So this, though, also, speaking of their farming techniques, is something that you had to thank from the Inca, right? This is called terracing, okay? Terracing is where they would actually cut into the dirt itself, flatten it out, build a wall up, and then build another flat surface. And they would farm on top of all these flat surfaces, right? This is like the Aztec or the Incan version of the Aztec chinampa, right? You're taking your geographic disadvantage and making it an advantage, right? So they actually could farm vertically for the Inca. And they used the llamas to move certain items up and down hills and stuff like that because they could carry about 60 pounds, give or take, right? Now, the greatest thing about it, the Inca, is something specifically that they farmed from this area. Everybody always wants to say potatoes come from Ireland or Idaho, and all those people are really, really wrong. All right, so potatoes are actually from Peru. The Incans were the first ones to cultivate and farm potatoes, right? So you have the Incans to thank for sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, mashed potatoes, French fries. Like, you have the Incans to thank for those things, right? So they also farmed this amazing grain that has become very popular in the last few years called quinoa, right? Quinoa, Q-U-I-N-O-A. It's like a small grain that they would actually like farm in the mountains and the steppes of the Andes Mountains. Now, sorry, that coffee's so good. But so as you can see, the Incans are phenomenally advanced, right? They had their own polytheistic religious structure. They actually had medicine. They were doing some types of rudimentary brain surgeries in the Incan Empire by like giving people a certain leaf or a certain cocktail of stuff that they found in the forest, and actually making a simple anesthetic out of it that would actually knock people out, and they would actually be able to open their skull up and relieve pressure. So they're phenomenally advanced people, crazy advanced. And I don't think I need to how many times do I have to say 10,000 miles worth of trade routes? That's ridiculous. Now, we do spend a lot of time in the Aztecs talking about human sacrifice. The Incans also had a form of human sacrifice as well. They typically would sacrifice children, though, right? Because children were believed to be more pure and more directly related to their gods and their religious order, right? So this is one of those sacrificed children. So some of y'all immediately like, oh my God, why does she look so, I'm going to use the word like not that old, right? This Incan mummy is over 1,000 years old. Now, what they would do actually is a priest would take this child up into the mountains, and usually they would give them like coca leaves possibly and let them chew on that, which is the stuff that makes like the drug, right, cocaine, and where Coca-Cola actually got its early flavoring from. And then or they would be given alcohol to kind of numb them up. But a family had donated this child to the government, right? So as a form of their religious sacrifice. And it was considered a great honor to actually have your child be sacrificed. But this girl's only about 14, right? So she was found with a piece of coca leaf in her mouth. And what they do, though, is the priest would take her up into the mountains, perform a religious ritual, and then beat her to death or strangle her to death, right? So, and then left her up there. But the crazy part about it is the mountains, the Andes Mountains, are so high, and like the altitude is so great, and the air is so dry that it actually mummified this girl's body. And she's not the only one. You can actually Google right now Incan mummy, and they'll pop right up, and they're all like children because of the child sacrifice that the Incans would perform, right? So, and again, that's Pizarro. And this is the man that he's going to come into contact with, right? So we talked about a lot of stuff about the Aztec. We talked a lot of stuff just now about the Inca, the llamas and the potatoes and the terracing and the Machu Picchu and the Andes and where they're located and right? So they had a massive empire that was also phenomenally wealthy. But ironically enough, they didn't even know they were that wealthy. The Incans didn't put a lot of stock in gold or silver. They used it mostly as decorative pieces, much like you would think, but they used different forms of monetary values, a lot more bartering systems, right? Like a simple, primitive Incan had no need for a ton of gold, right? Whereas the kings and the queens of like the Incan society were the ones that were using it to decorate religious temples or possibly some of the garments that they would wear. So there was an immense amount of gold and silver in the Incan Empire, right? And Pizarro was well aware of this. And so he decides that he's going to go in when they're weak, right? So the Inca were extremely weak because of a civil war and disease, right? So the civil war that had broken out in the Incan empire was all over who's going to be leader next. And this guy and his brother were the two that actually fought against each other. This guy's name is King Atahualpa. All right, so Atahualpa. Now, it's spelled Atahualpa, Atahualpa, right? So Atahualpa actually led a huge war against his own brother because their father had died and both brothers claimed the throne. Now, to try and relate back to their religious order, whoever wins that war is going to become like the god king of the Inca again, right? So Atahualpa ends up winning, and he actually is witnessing a lot of his people die from smallpox, right? Mainly brought over by the conquistadors in traveling over and through, right? Now, King Atahualpa knew fully well, just like Moctezuma, that the Spaniards were bad news, right? And he knew fully well that he also outnumbered them. What he was not aware of is some of the information that Moctezuma was aware of. Moctezuma was aware of these large beasts that the Spaniards rode. He was aware of like these sticks that produce lightning, according to some accounts, right, by the ancient Aztec. He was aware of these different weapons, Moctezuma was. Atahualpa was not. So Atahualpa planned to set a trap for the Spaniards and was like, oh, well, we just simply have more people than they do. So there's absolutely no way possible that the Spaniards have any chance or shot at taking us out if we bring basically our entire empire with us. I can't stand this one part of the hair that keeps sticking out. So anyway, what ends up happening though is he wants to set a trap for him at the Incan city of Cajamarca. All right, so spelled like so. All right, C-A-J. Okay, let me bring you a little bit closer. All right, Cajamarca, and there's going to be a great battle there, right? So it's going to be called the Battle of Cajamarca, right? So the Battle of Cajamarca is the scene where Atahualpa is going to be, well, you'll see. So what ends up happening is Atahualpa sends word to the Spaniards, right? And he says, meet me at this place called Cajamarca, and he planned on setting a trap for them, when ironically enough, the Spaniards are going to set a trap for Atahualpa. And what ends up happening at the Battle of Cajamarca, the Incans actually like sit and they rest up in the steeps of the mountains, right? And there are thousands of them. He ends up bringing somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 like people with him. Atahualpa does. The Spaniards only have a force of about 300 people, give or take, right? With about 60 of them being on horseback, and they got a few cannons, you know, a couple dogs, like, but nothing. Like 10,000 versus 300, you're talking about a massive disadvantage numbers-wise. But remember, the Spaniards have guns, cannons, horses. They have disease on their side. They have a lot of stuff going for them. Also, they have a slight bit of intelligence in knowing how to use these things. So what Pizarro tells Atahualpa to do is he's like, come meet me in the square in Cajamarca, right? So it was a large square that actually existed in Cajamarca, right? And it had some protective walls around it, right? Just some small protective walls right here that would prevent people from being able to enter in or out, right? But there were areas where you could get out on the corners and like other doors and stuff. But it had some walls around it. And in front of these walls were some trees were planted, right? Some little trees and some little like some shrubs and some little stuff right there. And so he knows, Pizarro knows, that Atahualpa is going to have to proceed in through the gates, right? Like through this area right here. So Pizarro's plan was he hid all of his forces between those walls and inside of the buildings that surrounded the square of Cajamarca. So he hid them all around the outside of the square, right? And the only two people that were waiting in the square for Atahualpa were Pizarro himself and a priest, right? So when he sends word for Atahualpa to come, Atahualpa fully planned on just signaling an attack and turning somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000, because he left about 3,000 of them back in the campsite, but 7,000 people to try and just turn and just take out the Spanish as fast as possible, right? So Atahualpa proceeds in, right? And he's got a huge amount of people with him. He's got guys in front, guys behind him, guys around him. He's being carried. I don't think if you understand what I'm getting at. He's being carried in on this huge table, right? Like, so I can't, there's a word, it's like his throne is on, there's a word for this thing, and I can never remember what it is. But he's basically sitting above everybody, right? So the people in like that were carrying him had the table, like there's a word for it. It's almost like a stretcher in a sense, but he had a throne on top of it, carrying it on their shoulders, and Atahualpa was sitting up on top of it, above everyone else. Because remember, he's like the god king of the Inca, right? So here come the Inca, and they proceed in on this large parade of a sense. And Atahualpa is right here, right? The priest then walks up to Atahualpa and starts speaking to him in Spanish, and Atahualpa has no clue what he's saying, right? And then hands him a Bible. Atahualpa looks at it, looks at the priest, goes like that. He can't read it, so he throws it to the ground. The priest then sends a wild signal talking about, you have now just banished God, so we have the right as Spanish crusaders and conquistadors to attack you. They put off a big signal, and then the guys around the outside immediately start firing their weapons and rushing in and firing cannons and ringing bells. And imagine if you're the Incan people. And granted, you have like somewhere in the neighborhood of 8,000 people with you, but you now are being berated by guys on horses, and there's guns going off and cannons and bells ringing and all this loud noise. So the crowd immediately starts to scatter, and what ends up happening is this huge massacre, right? So, and 300 Spanish people don't lose a single person. One of them gets wounded, more than likely by friendly fire from another Spanish soldier on accident, and what ends up happening is they kill 5,000. Or no, it's not 5,000. They killed 2,000 of those Incan people. 300 people killed 2,000 Incans and then took 5,000 of them as prisoner. And one of them that was taken as prisoner is Atahualpa himself, right? And then they're escorted back to Cusco, which is the capital city of the Inca. This thing is driving me nuts. And then the Spanish are going to ransom him, right? Because Atahualpa did not want to die, right? So he basically holds himself for ransom. When the Spanish enter Cusco, they see one of these rooms, right? This is the temple of one of their sun god rooms, right? Now, this is grossly dramatized because I'm pretty confident, like this is a very, very cheap reproduction. I'm just trying to give you a sense of it because I'm pretty sure that's a coin right there from Pirates of the Caribbean. But like a room that would look much like this, right? Covered on the walls in gold, and it was a temple to their sun god, right? So Atahualpa, the Spaniards saw this and they were like, oh my God. And Atahualpa realized that the Spanish were very, very all about gold. So what he told them, he was like, oh, I can fill a room like this 2 or 3 times full of gold if you promise not to kill me. And the Spaniards were like, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. He does that, pays the ransom, and then the Spaniards are like, well, we're still going to kill you though. And they make him convert to Catholicism, and then they kill him by strangulation. They like asked me the device about it tomorrow, but they have a specific device where they would like pull this lever and it strangled Atahualpa to death, even after he paid his own ransom and converted to Catholicism. That's crazy, right? The Spaniards then, when they take over the Incan people, are going to stumble upon, the word right here is immense, an immense fortune of gold and silver. I'm talking crazy big, right? Scary big. And then we're going to proceed after that tomorrow, talking about the expansion of the Spanish inside of the Americas. I think you guys are awesome. Y'all did a great job today. I will see you tomorrow in class. Y'all have a good one.